The autumn rain fell steadily against the grand windows of Ashford Palace, each droplet tracing paths down the ancient glass like tears on a weathered face. Prince Alexander stood motionless in the corridor outside the royal chambers, his usually composed features etched with worry that deepened with each passing hour. The palace, which had witnessed centuries of joy and sorrow within its walls, seemed to hold its breath alongside him. Princess Eleanor had fallen ill 3 weeks ago. What began as simple fatigue after the harvest festival had transformed into something far more serious. The finest physicians in the kingdom had been summoned, their learned faces growing increasingly grave with each examination. Alexander had watched his beloved wife, once so vibrant and full of life, grow pale and fragile against the silk pillows of their bed. The hallway where Alexander now waited had been his playground as a child. He remembered racing through these very corridors with his younger brother, their laughter echoing off the marble floors, while stern-faced guards pretended not to notice their antics. Now, those same floors reflected only shadows and the flickering light of ornate candelabras that had burned through countless vigils. Lady Margaret, Eleanor's closest friend and lady-in-waiting, emerged from the chambers with red-rimmed eyes. She had been with Eleanor since they were girls, sharing secrets and dreams long before Eleanor had ever imagined she would wear a crown. Margaret's usual composure had crumbled over the past days, and seeing her now, Alexander felt his heart constrict even tighter. "Your Highness," Margaret whispered, dropping into a curtsy that seemed to take all her remaining strength. "She's asking for you." Alexander's hands trembled as he reached for the door handle. Throughout their 8 years of marriage, Eleanor had been his anchor, his wisest advisor, and his dearest friend. She had brought warmth to the cold protocols of palace life, insisting on personally visiting orphanages and hospitals, always returning with stories that made even the most hardened courtiers smile. Her laugh had the power to fill the grandest ballroom, and her compassion had won the hearts of even their fiercest critics. Inside the chamber, the afternoon light filtered through heavy curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. Eleanor lay propped against numerous pillows, her golden hair spread like a halo around her face. Despite her illness, there remained a grace about her that took Alexander's breath away. Her eyes, still bright despite the shadows beneath them, found his immediately. "My darling," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with such tenderness that Alexander had to blink back tears. He crossed the room in quick strides and took her delicate hand in both of his, pressing it gently to his lips. "You shouldn't tire yourself," he said, though he knew his protests were futile. Eleanor had always possessed a will of iron beneath her gentle exterior. It was one of the many things he loved about her. "Alexander," she began, and he could see the effort each word cost her. "There are things I must say. Things that cannot wait for tomorrow's uncertainty." He wanted to tell her there would be countless tomorrows, that she would recover and they would grow old together as they had always planned. They had spoken of watching their future children play in the palace gardens, of traveling to distant lands when his duties allowed, of quiet evenings reading together in the library. But the words died in his throat as he looked at her pale face and saw the truth written there. Dr. Morrison, the royal physician, stood quietly in the corner of the room. He had been with the royal family for 3 decades, delivering both Alexander and his siblings. The good doctor's presence had always been reassuring, but now his silent vigil only emphasized the gravity of the situation. Beside him stood Father Benedict, the palace chaplain, his prayer book clutched in weathered hands. Eleanor's breathing grew labored, and Alexander helped her sit up straighter, adjusting the pillows behind her with infinite care. She smiled at him, that same smile that had captivated him when they first met at her father's estate all those years ago. He had been a young prince then, burdened by expectations and duty, until she had challenged him to a horse race through the meadows and beaten him soundly, laughing as she did so. "Do you remember," she said softly, "the night of our wedding? You were so nervous you nearly forgot your vows." Alexander managed a weak smile. "And you whispered them to me, saving me from complete humiliation in front of half the kingdom." "We were quite the pair," Eleanor murmured. "Still are." The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, the palace clock tower chimed the hour. Time, which had seemed to slow during these long days of illness, suddenly felt precious and fleeting. Alexander could see Eleanor gathering her strength, preparing for whatever she needed to say. "I need you to listen carefully," she said, her fingers tightening slightly around his. "There are things about our life, about our love, that I need you to carry forward." Alexander leaned closer, memorizing every detail of her face, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she looked at him with such love, the delicate curve of her lips, the way a strand of hair fell across her forehead. He had painted her portrait once, early in their courtship. Though his artistic skills had hardly done her justice, she had kept that amateur painting in her private study, claiming it was her most treasured possession because it showed how he saw her. "First," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with determination, "you must promise me that you will not let grief consume you. This palace, this kingdom, needs your strength. But more than that, you deserve happiness, Alexander. You deserve love and light in your life, even when I cannot be the one to provide it." "Eleanor, please," Alexander's voice broke. "Don't speak of such things. My stubborn prince," she said with a ghost of her old teasing manner, "always trying to protect me from difficult truths. But we must face this together, as we have faced everything else." She paused, catching her breath, and Alexander saw Margaret slip quietly from the room, giving them privacy. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the tapestries that depicted the kingdom's long history. Eleanor had commissioned new ones just last year, showing scenes of common people alongside nobility, insisting that history belonged to all. "There's something else," Eleanor said, and Alexander saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it fear? Regret? Something I should have told you long ago. But I was selfish. I wanted our happiness to remain untouched by shadows from the past. Alexander's brow furrowed. In all their years together, Eleanor had been nothing but honest with him. They had shared everything, or so he had believed. "Whatever it is, it changes nothing between us," he assured her. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You say that now, but you don't know. Alexander, before we met, before my father brought me to court, there was someone else." The words hung in the air between them. Alexander felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. But he kept his expression calm, his hands steady as they held hers. "Tell me," he said simply. "His name was James," Eleanor whispered. "He was the son of our local blacksmith. We were young, so young, and foolish enough to believe love could overcome any obstacle. We met in secret for months, planning a future that could never be. When my father discovered our connection, he was furious. James was sent away, and I was told he had died in a fire at sea." Alexander remained silent, processing this revelation. He could picture a younger Eleanor, just as spirited but more naive, believing in a love that defied social boundaries. It explained the sadness he had sometimes glimpsed in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, the way she had thrown herself so completely into charitable work for the common people. "But he didn't die," Eleanor continued, her words coming faster now, as though she feared running out of time. "I learned the truth only last month. Margaret discovered it by accident, while sorting through old correspondence for the palace archives. James survived. Alexander. He's lived all these years believing I abandoned him for a crown." "Why didn't you tell me when you found out?" Alexander asked, surprised to find his voice gentle, rather than accusatory. "Because I was dying," Eleanor said simply. "Because I knew my time was limited, and I couldn't bear to spend it watching you doubt us, doubt what we have built together. But now, facing the end, I realize that keeping this from you is another form of abandonment. You deserve the complete truth." Alexander lifted her hand to his lips again, holding it there for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "My darling Eleanor, do you imagine this changes how I feel? You loved someone before me. Many people do. What matters is that you chose me, that we chose each other, and that we have created a life filled with more joy than I ever thought possible. But there's more," Eleanor said, and now the tears were flowing freely down her cheeks. Alexander, I sent him a letter. After I learned he was alive, I needed him to know that I never chose to leave him. That my father's deception robbed us both. I needed to give him peace. And did you? Alexander asked. Give him peace? Eleanor nodded slowly. He wrote back. Just once. He has a family now. A wife who loves him. Children who bear his name. He thanked me for the truth and wished me well. He said he was glad I had found happiness with you, that hearing of your kindness and dedication to the kingdom had helped heal old wounds. The afternoon was fading into evening, and the rain had softened to a gentle mist. Alexander could hear the palace beginning its evening routines. Guards changing shifts, servants lighting lamps in the corridors, the kitchen preparing dinner that he knew neither of them would eat. Life continuing its relentless march forward, even as his world balanced on a precipice. Is that what troubles you so? Alexander asked. This connection to your past? Eleanor shook her head weakly. No, my love. What troubles me is that I have one more truth to share. And this one may truly test your generous heart. Alexander felt his chest tighten as Eleanor struggled to continue. Her breathing had become more labored, and he could see the tremendous effort each word required. He wanted to tell her to rest, to save her strength. But he knew that whatever she needed to say was important enough to her that she would spend her last reserves of energy on it. When I was very young, Eleanor began, her voice barely audible. Before I even met James, there was an incident. I was perhaps 7 years old, playing in the gardens of my father's estate. There was an old well there, covered with rotting wooden boards. I was chasing a butterfly, not watching where I was going, and I fell through. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened involuntarily. He could picture it too clearly. A young Eleanor, full of life and curiosity, suddenly plunging into darkness. The thought of how close he had come to never knowing her at all made his heart race. I should have died that day, Eleanor continued. The well was deep, partially filled with water. I couldn't swim, could barely keep my head above the surface. I screamed until my voice gave out. Certain that those dark walls would be the last thing I ever saw. She paused, gathering strength, and Alexander saw something in her eyes he had never seen before, a deep, ancient fear that had been carefully hidden all these years. He stroked her hair gently, offering what comfort he could, but then something extraordinary happened. Eleanor whispered. A woman appeared at the edge of the well. Not a servant or anyone from the estate. I knew every face there. She was dressed strangely, in robes that seemed to shimmer even in the darkness. She spoke to me in a voice that was both young and old, telling me to be calm. That help was coming. Alexander found himself leaning forward, caught up in her story despite his worry. Eleanor had never mentioned this incident before, and he wondered why she was sharing it now. In these precious final moments, she told me things, Alexander. Things no stranger could have known. She knew my name, knew that I would one day wear a crown, knew that I would find great love, but that it would come with great sacrifice. She said I was being given additional years, borrowed time, and that one day I would have to return them. Eleanor, Alexander said gently, you were a frightened child. The mind can play tricks in moments of terror. That's what I told myself for years, Eleanor replied, a sad smile touching her lips. Even after they pulled me out, alerted by my father who said he heard my cries from an impossible distance away, I convinced myself it had been a hallucination brought on by fear. But Alexander, she told me the exact date I would meet you. She described your eyes, your smile, the way you would nervously adjust your crown when you were uncomfortable. She told me we would have 8 beautiful years together. Luff, a chill ran down Alexander's spine. They had indeed been married for exactly 8 years. He wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but the certainty in Eleanor's eyes made him pause. There's a reason I'm telling you this now, Eleanor continued, her voice growing urgent. She said that when my borrowed time was up, I would have a choice to make. A choice that would affect not just my fate, but yours as well. Before Alexander could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Dr. Morrison entered quietly, his face grave. "Your Highness," he said softly. "I must check on Her Highness's condition." Alexander reluctantly stepped back, allowing the physician to examine Eleanor. He watched as Morrison checked her pulse, listened to her breathing, felt her forehead. The doctor's expression grew increasingly concerned, and when he turned to Alexander, his eyes confirmed what they both feared. "Perhaps we should allow Her Highness to rest," Morrison suggested gently. "No," Eleanor said with surprising firmness. "There isn't time. Please, doctor. Just a few more moments." Morrison nodded reluctantly and withdrew to his corner. Alexander resumed his place at Eleanor's side, taking her hand once more. It felt so fragile in his, like a bird's wing. "The woman in the well," Eleanor continued. "She told me that when this time came, I would have to choose between holding on selfishly or letting go with grace. She said that how I chose would determine not just my own peace, but the future happiness of the one I loved most." "I don't understand," Alexander said, though part of him was beginning to. "My darling, stubborn prince," Eleanor said, tears flowing freely now. "Don't you see? I could fight this. I could rage against it. Cling to every last second. Make you watch as I fade away piece by piece. I could let bitterness and fear poison our last moments together. Or, Alexander's voice was barely a whisper, or I can choose to fill these final hours with all the love I have for you, and then let go peacefully, knowing that my last gift to you is sparing you a prolonged agony." The woman said that how we face our endings shapes the beginnings that follow. Alexander felt tears burning his eyes. "You speak as though this is farewell." "Because it is, my love," Eleanor said softly. "I feel it. The borrowed time is almost up. But before I go, there are things I must tell you. Instructions, if you will, for after." "Eleanor, please, listen to me," she interrupted with some of her old authority. "First, you must not blame Morrison or any of the physicians. They have done everything possible. This was always going to happen, and they gave us 3 more weeks than fate intended." Alexander nodded mutely, unable to speak, past the lump in his throat. "Second," Eleanor continued, "in my writing desk, in the secret compartment you pretend not to know about, there are letters. One for you, to be read when the grief is less raw. Others, for the children we never had. For the family I had hoped to build with you. Keep them or burn them as you see fit, but know they were written with love." The mention of children nearly broke Alexander's composure entirely. They had tried for years, consulted specialists, prayed in every chapel from here to the coast. Eleanor had borne the disappointment with grace, but he knew how deeply she had longed to hold their child. "Third," Eleanor said, her voice growing softer, "there is a girl in the orphanage on Whitmore Street. Her name is Sophie. She's 8 years old, the same age I was when I fell down that well. She has no one, Alexander, no one but the hope that someday someone will see her and choose her. Promise me you will visit her. You don't have to. Just visit her." Alexander understood what she wasn't saying. "Eleanor, always thinking of others even now. I promise," he whispered. "Fourth," she continued, though speaking was clearly becoming more difficult, "you must remarry. The kingdom needs an heir. But more than that, you need love. Don't let the courtiers push you into a cold political alliance. Find someone who makes you laugh, who challenges you, who sees the man beneath the crown." "Eleanor, I can't. You can and you will," she said firmly. "Because I ask it of you. Because loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. And I cannot bear the thought of that joy dying with me. Let my love for you be the foundation for more love, not a monument to loss." The room had grown darker as evening approached. Someone had lit more candles, and their flickering light made Eleanor look almost ethereal, as though she was already halfway between this world and the next. Alexander could hear voices in the corridor, courtiers gathering, word spreading that the end was near. "There's something else," Eleanor said, and Alexander was amazed she had any strength left. "About James. In my letter to him, I included something. A provision. It's already been arranged with the Treasury." Alexander waited, knowing she would explain in her own time. "His youngest daughter has a gift for music," Eleanor said. "Remarkable talent, according to the village priest who wrote to me months ago seeking patronage for her education. I've arranged for her to receive training at the Royal Conservatory, all expenses paid. She'll never know it came from me. It will be recorded as a standard royal scholarship. But Alexander, she could be extraordinary with the right opportunities." "You've been planning this for months?" Alexander asked, understanding dawning. "Since I first fell ill," Eleanor admitted. "I knew my time was limited, and I wanted to leave things settled, complete. No unfinished business, no unpaid debts of the heart." Despite everything, Alexander found himself marveling at her. Even facing death, Eleanor had been thinking of others, planning ways to help, to heal old wounds, and create new possibilities. It was so perfectly her that his heart ached with love and impending loss. "You are remarkable," he told her. "Do you know that?" "Absolutely remarkable." "I am tired," Eleanor corrected gently. "So very tired, my love. But there's one last thing, the most important thing of all." She paused, and Alexander could see her gathering the last reserves of her strength. The physician stepped forward, concerned, but Eleanor waved him back with a weak gesture. "Lean close," she whispered, and Alexander did, bringing his ear close to her lips. What she whispered then was for him alone, words that would echo in his heart for years to come, words that would sustain him through the dark days ahead, and eventually guide him toward the light again. When she finished speaking, Eleanor pulled back slightly to look at him. Her eyes, though dimmed by illness, still held that spark of mischief he had fallen in love with. "Now," she said, "tell me about your day. Tell me something ordinary and wonderful, something that has nothing to do with illness or endings." Alexander was startled by the request but understood immediately what she was doing, trying to give them one last moment of normalcy, one final memory, untainted by grief. He thought for a moment, then began to speak. "This morning," he said, his voice steadier than he expected, "I saw the most remarkable thing from the library window. You know the old gardener, Thomas? The one who talks to the roses? Well, he was training his new apprentice, that young boy with the eager smile. The boy was so enthusiastic, he nearly pruned half the rose garden before Thomas could stop him. But instead of scolding him, Thomas just laughed and showed him again. Patiently. Kindly. It reminded me of us," Eleanor finished softly. "You, so eager to prove yourself when you first became crown prince. Me, constantly stepping on your toes at court functions. We were quite the disaster, weren't we?" "The most beautiful disaster," Alexander agreed, managing a genuine smile. They talked then of small things, the way the morning light looked different in autumn, the cat that had adopted the kitchen staff and refused to leave, the new verses the court poet had written that were so terrible they were actually entertaining. For a few precious minutes, they were just Alexander and Eleanor, husband and wife, sharing the comfortable conversation of two people who knew each other completely. But Alexander could see the effort it was costing her. Her breathing was becoming more shallow, her responses slower, the candles had burned lower, and the room was filled with the quiet presence of those who wait at the boundary between life and death. "Alexander," Eleanor said suddenly, her voice clear but very quiet. "It's time." "No," he said reflexively. "Not yet. Please, not yet. My love," she said. And her smile was radiant despite everything. "Remember what I told you. This is my choice. My gift. Let me give it with grace." She gestured weakly. And understanding her wish, Alexander helped her sit up straighter. Even now, even at the end, Eleanor would meet her fate with dignity. The physician and Father Benedict stepped closer, but Eleanor's eyes never left Alexander's face. The palace clock tower began to chime the hour. 9 solemn notes that seemed to hang in the air like a benediction. Eleanor's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around Alexander's, and he knew with terrible certainty that these were their final moments together. "My dear ones," Eleanor said, her voice carrying to everyone in the room despite its softness. "Thank you for your care, your devotion, and your love. Each of you has made my journey lighter." Her eyes moved to Dr. Morrison. "Doctor, you have been more than a physician. You have been a guardian and a friend." To Father Benedict. "Father, your prayers have brought me comfort beyond measure." To Lady Margaret, who had slipped back into the room. "My dearest friend, you have been my strength when I had none." Margaret stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Your Highness, it has been the greatest honor of my life." Eleanor smiled at her, then turned back to Alexander. The others in the room seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of soft candlelight. "And you," she whispered, "you have been everything. My prince, my partner, my greatest love. You have given me a life filled with more happiness than I ever dreamed possible." "Eleanor," Alexander's voice broke completely. "How am I supposed to do this without you?" "The same way you've done everything else," she replied, her thumb weakly stroking his hand. "With courage, with grace, and with that beautiful heart of yours that sees the best in everyone. You were born to be a great king. Alexander, I was just blessed to walk beside you for a while." She paused, her breathing becoming more labored. When she spoke again, her voice was fading like an echo. "But you were asking about my final words. Are you ready to hear them?" Alexander nodded, unable to speak. He could feel the entire room holding its breath, aware they were witnessing something profound and sacred. Eleanor's eyes, still locked on his, seemed to glow with an inner light. "My final words are not of sadness or regret," she said. "They are of gratitude and hope. Gratitude for every sunrise we watched together, for every laugh we shared, for every challenge we faced hand in hand. Hope for your future, for the kingdom's future, for all the love that is yet to come into your life." She drew in a shaky breath, and Alexander could see the effort it took. "But most of all," she continued, "my final words are these. Our love was not borrowed time, Alexander. It was not something that ends with my last breath. Real love, true love, becomes part of who we are. It lives on in every kind act, every generous gesture, every moment of compassion. You will carry my love with you always, and it will make you stronger, not weaker. It will help you love again, more deeply and fully, because you know how precious such love is." The tears were flowing freely down Alexander's face now, and he made no effort to stop them. "I love you," he whispered. "Always, and forever." "And I love you," Eleanor replied. "Beyond always, beyond forever, beyond the boundaries of this world, and into whatever comes next. Remember that when the darkness seems too much, remember that you are loved, completely and eternally." She turned slightly, addressing the room one last time. "I have one final request. After I'm gone, I want there to be music. Not dirges or lamentations, but the spring waltz from our wedding. I want my last gift to this palace to be the memory of joy." Lady Margaret let out a soft sob, but nodded. Father Benedict stepped forward, his prayer book open. But Eleanor gently shook her head. "No last rites. Father, I've made my peace. Just stay close. All of you stay close." She settled back against the pillows, her energy clearly fading fast. Alexander could feel her pulse fluttering beneath his fingers like a butterfly trying to break free. Her eyes found his again, and in them he saw not fear, but a profound peace. "Tell me you'll be all right," she whispered. "Tell me you'll find happiness again. I need to hear it." Alexander swallowed hard. Everything in him wanted to refuse, to declare that happiness without her was impossible. But he could see what she needed from him. this final gift she was asking for. "I promise," he managed. "I'll try." "For you." "No," she corrected gently. "For you. For the kingdom. For the future. For love itself." Her voice was barely audible now. The woman at the well was right. You know, how we end determines how others begin. Let my ending be your beautiful beginning. My darling. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were unfocused, seeing something beyond the room. "Oh," she breathed, wonder in her voice. "Oh, Alexander. It's so beautiful. There's so much light. What do you see?" he asked urgently, leaning closer. "Peace," she whispered. "Perfect peace. And she's here. The woman from the well. She's smiling. She says, I chose well, that the borrowed time was well spent, that love given freely is never lost." Her breathing was becoming irregular now, with longer pauses between each breath. Alexander felt his heart breaking with each second, but he kept his eyes on her face, memorizing every detail, holding her hand as though he could anchor her to this world through sheer will. "Eleanor," he said softly. "My beloved Eleanor." Her eyes found his one last time, fully present, fully aware. "Remember," she breathed. "Remember it all. The joy most of all." She paused, gathering herself for one final effort. "And Alexander? Thank you. Thank you for showing me what it means to be truly, completely, eternally loved." With those words, something shifted in the room. The candles flickered as though touched by an unseen breeze. Eleanor's face, which had been tight with the effort of speaking, suddenly relaxed into an expression of perfect serenity. Her eyes remained open, still looking at Alexander, but the light behind them began to fade like the last rays of sunset. "Eleanor?" Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. She didn't respond, couldn't respond. Her chest rose once more, fell, and then was still. The hand in his remained warm but lifeless, the most vibrant, compassionate, extraordinary person Alexander had ever known was gone. For a moment, the room was absolutely silent. Even the rain had stopped, as though nature itself was paying its respects. Then, with trembling fingers, Alexander reached up and gently closed Eleanor's eyes. He lifted her hand to his lips one last time, holding it there as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, professionally checking for a pulse they all knew was gone. He looked at Alexander with deep compassion and nodded once. "She's at peace, Your Highness." She felt no pain at the end. Father Benedict began to pray softly, his words washing over the room like a benediction. Lady Margaret wept openly, supported by one of the other ladies in waiting. The news would spread quickly. Within minutes, the palace would know, and within hours, the kingdom. But for now, in this moment, it was just a husband saying goodbye to his wife. Alexander didn't know how long he sat there, holding Eleanor's cooling hand, whispering words of love and farewell that only the angels could hear. Eventually, gently, Dr. Morrison touched his shoulder. "Your Highness, we need to prepare her." "Yes," Alexander said numbly. "Yes, of course." But he didn't move. Couldn't seem to make his body obey his mind. It was Margaret who finally gave him the strength. She approached slowly, her own grief evident but controlled. "Your Highness," she said softly, "she wouldn't want you to sit in the dark. She asked for music. Remember? She asked for light and joy to be her memorial." Alexander looked up at her, seeing in Margaret's eyes the same loss he felt. They had both loved Eleanor, in different ways but with equal devotion. "How?" he asked simply. "How do I honor such a request when all I feel is darkness?" "By remembering who she was," Margaret replied. "By knowing that every moment of grief is also a testament to the love you shared. She wouldn't want that love to become a prison. Your Highness, she'd want it to be wings." Slowly, painfully, Alexander released Eleanor's hand. He stood on unsteady legs, his body stiff from sitting so long. As he did, something crinkled in his pocket. The letter Eleanor had mentioned. The one she had somehow slipped to him during their final embrace. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. He turned to face the others in the room. Lady Margaret is right, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. The princess gave us her final wishes. We will honor them. Send word to the musicians. I want the spring waltz played in the great hall. Open the windows. Light every candle. Let the palace know that we mourn a great lady, but we celebrate a life well lived. As the others moved to carry out his commands, Alexander took one last look at Eleanor. Even in death, she was beautiful. That slight smile still gracing her lips as though she knew a wonderful secret. And perhaps she did, he thought. Perhaps she now knew all the mysteries that the living could only guess at. He walked to the window and drew back the heavy curtains. The rain had indeed stopped, and the clouds were breaking apart to reveal the first stars of evening. As he watched, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Brief, brilliant, and then gone, leaving only the memory of its light. From somewhere in the palace, faint but growing stronger, came the sound of music. The spring waltz, just as Eleanor had requested, the same melody that had played as she walked down the aisle to meet him 8 years ago, radiant in white silk and diamonds, but more radiant still in her joy. He remembered how her hand had trembled as he took it, how they had both nearly laughed when the bishop fumbled his words, how perfect it had all been despite the small imperfections. Alexander didn't realize he was crying again until he tasted salt on his lips. But these tears were different. Still grief, yes, but mixed with gratitude for having known such love. Eleanor was right, as she usually was. The love remained, woven into the very fabric of his being. It would be his compass in the dark days ahead. A gentle cough behind him made him turn. Father Benedict stood there, compassion written on his weathered face. Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but there's something you should know. The princess spoke to me yesterday, privately. She had a final request that she didn't want to burden you with. Tell me, Alexander said. She asked that her funeral not be a state affair. She wanted something simpler, more personal. She said, and I quote, "Let those who loved me say goodbye as friends, not as subjects. There will be time enough for ceremony later." Despite everything, Alexander almost smiled. Even in planning her own funeral, Eleanor had thought of others' comfort first. Then, that's what we'll do, he decided. A private service for family and close friends. The kingdom can pay its respects in its own way, but her goodbye will be as she wished. Intimate and honest. As the priest withdrew, Alexander heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Many footsteps. The court was gathering, drawn by news and duty. Soon he would have to emerge, have to be the prince again, strong and composed for his people. But not yet. Not quite yet. He reached into his pocket and drew out Eleanor's letter. His name was written on it in her elegant hand, though he could see where the pen had shaken slightly. For a moment, he considered waiting as she had suggested, reading it when the grief was less raw. But he needed her words now. Needed this last connection. Breaking the seal, he unfolded the paper and began to read by starlight. My dearest Alexander, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I have gone ahead to prepare the way, as I always did for your royal progresses. Only this time, the journey is longer, and the destination somewhat uncertain. The letter continued, full of Eleanor's warmth, wisdom, and surprising humor. She wrote of their memories, of her hopes for his future, of small jokes only he would understand. But it was the final paragraph that broke him completely. Do not look for me in the cold ground or in the palace halls. Look for me in the spring flowers that bloom despite winter's harsh grip. Find me in the laughter of children who have never known hunger because of your policies. Hear me in the music that fills the air at every celebration. I am not gone, my beloved. I am transformed. From one heart that loved you, I have become part of every heart you touch with kindness. This is not goodbye, Alexander. This is simply Until we meet again. All my love, always, and forever, your Eleanor. As Alexander finished reading, the spring waltz reached its crescendo in the great hall. He carefully folded the letter and placed it over his heart. Then, squaring his shoulders, he walked toward the door. The hallway beyond was indeed full of people, courtiers, servants, guards, all waiting with anxious faces. He paused in the doorway, Eleanor's words echoing in his mind. When he had entered this room hours ago, he had been a husband fearing loss. Now he emerged a widower, but also something more. A man who had been loved completely, and who carried that love forward like a torch in the darkness. Her Royal Highness, Princess Eleanor, is at peace, he announced, his voice carrying down the corridor. Several people gasped. Others bowed their heads. She faced her ending with the same grace she brought to every day of her life. We will mourn her. Yes, but we will also celebrate her. She asked for music and light, not darkness and silence. Let us honor her wishes. As he walked down the hallway, people fell in behind him, creating an impromptu procession toward the great hall where the music played. His legs felt unsteady, and more than once, he thought he might collapse, but he didn't. He couldn't. Eleanor had given him his final instructions: to live, to love again, to let her death be not an ending but a transformation. The great hall was ablaze with candles when he entered, the spring waltz filling the space with bittersweet beauty. Courtiers had gathered, some dancing slowly, others simply standing and listening. When they saw him, the music faltered for a moment, but he gestured for it to continue. The princess wanted joy, he said simply. Let us give her joy. Aye. And so they did. Through tears and smiles, through memory and hope, they danced and remembered. Alexander stood by the great windows, watching it all, feeling Eleanor's presence in every note of music, every flicker of candlelight. The hallway where he had waited in agony seemed a lifetime ago. Everything had changed in those few hours, yet somehow, impossibly, love remained. As midnight approached and the gathering slowly dispersed, Alexander found himself alone with Lady Margaret. She stood beside him quietly, both of them watching the stars through the tall windows. She saved me, you know, Margaret said suddenly. When we were young, I was so shy, I could barely speak at court. Eleanor took me under her wing, gave me confidence. Everything I am, I owe to her friendship. She had that gift, Alexander agreed, making everyone she touched better, stronger, more themselves. What will you do now? Margaret asked gently. Alexander thought of Eleanor's words, her final instructions, the promises he had made. First, I will grieve, he said honestly. I will honor her memory with my tears, as much as with my smiles. Then, when I'm ready, I will try to live as she asked, fully, openly, without fear. I will visit an orphan named Sophie. I will ensure a blacksmith's daughter receives the finest musical education. I will rule with compassion and wisdom, and someday, perhaps, I will even love again. She would be proud, Margaret said softly. I hope so, Alexander replied. I hope that wherever she is now, she knows that her love lives on. That every choice I make from this day forward will be shaped by the years we shared. As if in answer, a warm breeze swept through the hall, despite the closed windows. It carried with it the faint scent of roses, Eleanor's favorite flower. For just a moment, Alexander could have sworn he heard her laugh. Bright and joyous, as it had been in their happiest days. Then, the moment passed, leaving only memory and the quiet determination to make those memories count. Alexander of Ashford had lost his princess, but in losing her, he had gained something precious. The knowledge that true love transcends death, that endings can indeed be beginnings, and that even in the darkest hallway, there is always, eventually, a door that opens onto light. The spring waltz played on, a melody of sorrow and celebration intertwined, as one chapter closed and another waited to begin. And in the royal city that night, despite the sadness that touched every heart, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as though heaven itself had gained a new light. In the days that followed, the kingdom mourned its beloved princess with an outpouring of grief that surprised even those who had known how deeply she was loved. But they also celebrated her life with the joy she had requested. Gardens were planted in her name, scholarships established, orphanages expanded. The mysterious patron who funded a young musician's education was never revealed, but her talent would one day fill concert halls with the same beauty Eleanor had brought to every life she touched. And in the palace, a prince learned slowly, day by day, to transform his grief into purpose, his loss into compassion, his memories into a legacy worthy of the remarkable woman who had loved him. He would go on to become one of the kingdom's greatest rulers, known for his wisdom and kindness. When asked years later what had shaped him into such a leader, he would always give the same answer. "I was loved by an extraordinary woman who taught me that how we face our endings determines how others begin." The spring waltz became a tradition in the kingdom, played at moments of both joy and sorrow, a reminder that the two were often intertwined. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the music drifted through the palace halls, servants would swear they could see a figure in white dancing alone by the windows, waiting patiently for her prince to finish his earthly duties and join her in a dance that would never end. But that is a story for another time, another telling. For now, it is enough to know that love given freely is never lost, that endings can be gifts, and that even in the darkest hallway, hope stands ready to catch those who fall.